Hello, my friend. It has been a while since I have talked to you, hasn't it? And it's been quite the eventful summer and then the fall. Behind the scenes, I've been deep in the weeds of professional obligations with my day job, busy writing schedule for American Rifleman, and of course, probably first and foremost, my family. A few times, especially in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, I wanted to vent some feelings and talk about it, but I withheld. I've never been one much to dive into that kind of commentary. But that said, the events over the last several months have got me thinking a lot about the purpose of the Everyday Marksman and where I want to go and what's next and why do I do what I do. And I wanted to consider who I write for you. And while my core mission of helping regular people learn military skills as a path for self-improvement is the same, I think there's something to be said for the looming prospects of old age. And why do I say that? You know, when I first started the Everyday Marksman, I was probably about 30 years old. And here I am, I'm 42. It's been a long time. And my perspectives on a lot of things have changed in some areas, and others they've been reinforced. But let's look back in history. Let's set the Wayback Machine to April 1775. Thomas Gage is the governor of Massachusetts, and he bears the task of stomping out growing civil unrest amongst the colonists. Appointed by the British government, Gage has a nasty reputation for harsh enforcement of British law known as the Intolerable Acts. Included amongst these laws were a closure of the Boston port, which was retaliation for the Boston Tea Party, limiting of public gatherings and town meetings, revocation of the ability for colonists to hold trials, and of course the Quartering Act, which allowed the governor to house British soldiers in colonist homes. As you are no doubt aware, these acts did not sit well with colonists. The embers of rebellion were quickly becoming flames. To head off the ability of the colonists to openly revolt with force, Thomas Gage ordered British regulars to march 20 miles northwest of Boston to a small town called Concord, where the colonists have a store of weapons, cannons, and powder. Spies got wind that the raid would happen on April 19th. The night before, patriots like Paul Revere, Samuel Prescott, and William Dawes rode all along the countryside alerting others to the impending action. Led by British Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, 700 regulars began the march from Boston to Concord the evening of April 18th. An advance party, led by British Major John Pitcairn, arrived at Lexington Green at about 5 a.m. At Lexington, the regulars face a group of 77 militiamen emerging from the Buckman Tavern across the street and forming up on the triangular Lexington Green. Now, the green is a mere 2.1 acres in size, about the size of 2 football fields. So why am I talking about the events of Lexington and Concord? Well, there's a lot of characters, a lot of people who were involved in this that I think are inspiration that we should all take away from this. And by the way, credit to everything I'm saying. I really have to give a shout out here to the Appleseed Project. Having gone to a couple of their shoots, they always tell these stories and they're great. So if you haven't done one, definitely go do it. But let's talk about some of these characters, starting with perhaps the most famous, and that is Captain John Parker. Now, the leader of the militia group standing on the Lexington Green is John Parker. He's 45 years old. He's a veteran of the French and Indian War, and by April 19, 1775, he was dying from tuberculosis. His men had trouble hearing him talk, but history remembers his words. Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. Tempers flare at Lexington, and the two sides exchange a volley of fire. The militiamen retreat, and the British regulars move on to Concord to capture the weapons. Captain Parker survived that day and went on to participate in the siege of Boston before succumbing to tuberculosis in September 1775 at the age of 46. Now let's talk about John Brooks. As the British regulars arrived at Concord at about 8 a.m., the militia had already removed and hidden most of the small arms. The exception were 2 large cannons suitable for use against fortifications. The British grenadiers smashed the trunnions and burned the gun carriages at the town center. The fire accidentally spread to a nearby meeting house. As smoke billowed high into the air, visible from miles all around, a group of militiamen stood in a field gathering forces. They saw the smoke rising from Concord and assumed the British must be burning down the town. Enraged, hundreds of militiamen began flooding down the muster field towards the Old North Bridge. The two sides exchanged fire, and the British regulars become more and more startled at the accuracy of militia fire. In all, 2,000 militiamen would flood the countryside, and upon seeing the forces advancing on them, the British regulars retreat and rally at Miriam's Corner, about 1 mile east of Concord. This was about noon. Seeing an opportunity to attack an unprotected flank, militia captain John Brooks, who's 23 at the time, led the Reading, Massachusetts militia to assault the British formation. This was the first official offensive action of the Revolutionary War. And this attack forced the British regulars into a hasty retreat down what we now call Battle Road. John Brooks also survived that day and the war and went on to become the 11th governor of Massachusetts from 1816 to 1823. So as the British are running down Battle Road in formation, it's a harrowing 5-mile trip, hounded along the way the entire time. Along the way, militiamen from all over the region took positions ahead of the retreating British columns and set ambushes. Captain John Parker took his revenge at about 1:30 p.m. when he ambushed a British column along Bay Road. Among the militia was a gentleman named Hezekiah Wyman of Woburn, Massachusetts. Born April 19, 1720, the events of April 19, 1775 happened to be his 55th birthday. Also a veteran of the French and Indian War, Hezekiah was a tall, gaunt man with long white hair that he let flow in the breeze. When word spread of the Lexington skirmish, Hezekiah mounted his white horse and set out with a rifle in hand, one of the few actual rifles, not muskets, in the area. Now, Hezekiah Wyman was too late to join the Battle of Lexington and Concord, but arrived just in time to participate in harassing the regulars along their retreat down Battle Road. He employed an entirely different tactic of stopping about 250 yards ahead of the approaching column, laying his rifle across the seat of his horse's saddle, carefully firing a shot and dropping British soldiers or officers with alarming frequency. When the column drew within 100 yards, Hezekiah mounted his horse again, rode ahead for a ways, dismounted, and repeated the procedure. The British did not know who this apparition was, but they knew that each time this pale man in a white horse appeared, they took casualties. The British soldiers who survived the march called him Death on a Pale Horse. Hezekiah ran out of ammunition several times during the attack and stopped to resupply as needed. Then he would appear at seemingly random times on a flank or in front of the column, signaling his presence with a deadly accurate fire and his white horse. Hezekiah also survived that day, pursuing the British all the way down to Charleston, and returned home unscathed, later dying in 1779. Now there's another individual who I think bears mentioning. You may have heard this story before. The retreating British reached Lexington at about 3 p.m., and to their relief, they were met with an additional 1,000 reinforcements led by Lieutenant General Hugh Percy. At 3:30 p.m., under the cover of General Percy's fresh troops and 6-pound field guns, the march back to Boston continues. And along the retreat, the reinforced British passed through a village called Menotomy. Today it's called Arlington. A crossroads town, it's a logical place for militia to assemble as they arrive from surrounding areas, and they gathered up and took positions all along the road from Lexington to Boston. 26-year-old Lieutenant Gideon Foster led his company from Danvers, over 16 miles away, in just 4 hours. Now, lining one part of the road was a stone wall near Jason Russell's house. Foster's men took up ambush positions along with Jason Russell himself, age 58, and his 42-year-old neighbor, Amy Cutter, who earlier that day had captured 3 British supply wagons. Now, Amy urged his friend Jason to flee, which he shook his head and said, "An Englishman's home is his castle." Both men stay and fight. The British regulars arrive at about 4 p.m. Fearing more snipers like Hezekiah Wyman, Lieutenant Colonel Smith split his forces into squads and has entered the town and ordered them to attack every building up close, while also sending flankers around to clean up anybody who ran. Russell and the group at his wall were among the first to see contact. Flanking parties appear and pin the men down. Those not immediately shot made a dash for Russell's house, and Jason Russell died in his own doorway, hit with 2 separate shots. The regulars close in, and fighting devolved into hand-to-hand combat with fist and bayonet inside the walls of Jason Russell's house. The British gave no quarter. Now, on the other side of the road, the British troops encounter Samuel Whitmore, who's the character I want to talk about. Now, born July 27th, 1696, Samuel was 78 years old on this day. Prior to operating a small farm outside of Charlestown, Samuel had served several prior conflicts, including the War of Austrian Succession, which was 1744 to 1748, when he was 44, and again, the French and Indian War when he was 64. As the fighting broke out in Menotomy, Samuel Whitmore crouched behind a stone wall on the north side of the road, armed with a musket, 2 dueling pistols, and a ceremonial saber. And when the flankers came upon him, Samuel killed one grenadier with his musket, drew his pistols, and continued firing, killing at least one more soldier and wounding another in the process. Then he raised his saber and pressed the attack. The British forces fell upon him. They shot him in the face and bayoneted him 13 times as revenge for this harrowing experience. As the British moved on from Menotomy, the bloodiest battle of the day, militiamen found Samuel Whitmore still alive. He lay in the ground, the pool of his own blood, still trying to reload his musket and press the fight. The militiamen took him to Dr. Cotton Tufts of Medford, Massachusetts, and Dr. Tufts took a look at Samuel's condition and gave no hope for survival. And against all odds, Samuel Whitmore survived that day and went on to live for 18 more years, dying at the age of 96. So get to the point, Matt. Why am I talking about the events of April 19th, battles Lexington and Concord, and these characters? Several years ago, a small unit tactics instructor told me combat is a young man's game. I was about 33 at the time and was clearly getting into the old man territory by this instructor's perspective. Now, bearing in mind, he was at least 15 years older than me. But his point was that there's a reason militaries leverage the youth, enthusiasm, and aggression of men in their early to mid-20s for the bulk of combat operations. While this is true for modern peer-to-peer sustained combat operations, I happen to believe that nobody is truly free of an obligation to be ready to fight. Many of the officers from April 19, 1775 were indeed young, but many were experienced and capable old men who were ready to stand up and support their countrymen in times of need. As we get older, we may not be as fast as we once were, nor as strong. The complications of old age and injuries are such to catch us eventually. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't always strive to be as capable as we can be. Staying fit and skilled gives us purpose. It gives us something to pass on to those young bucks who have plenty of motivation but not a lot of know-how. As David Mamet supposedly put it, old age and treachery will always beat youth and exuberance. Should the day come that you are facing down a scenario X in your own neighborhood, you are the natural leader of your community. But here's something to keep in mind. I am not teaching Civil War. The Everyday Marksman, as a website, as a podcast, as a brand, sits in a strange position in the gun sphere. On one end, you have the popular gun blogs that churn out reviews and product updates several times a day. They have a stable of writers and contributors to keep things coming nearly constantly. And they hyper-focus on that one topic, guns. Sometimes they talk about news and politics, but it's mostly guns. On the other end of the spectrum, you have writers who specialize in preparing for unconventional warfare. And these guys are usually 1 or 2 man shows who provide training and you can pay them. And they have a depth of experience in the topics that I just cannot possibly hope to match. I am on neither of these ends. I'm in that boring middle. So what is it that I'm about? Well, to wrap this up, let me once again explain who I'm here for. The Everyday Marksman exists primarily as a path to provide regular people a roadmap to personal excellence. The way that we do that is through enhancing your confidence and ability to survive in difficult situations. Our chosen tool includes martial skills like marksmanship, physical fitness, survival skills, martial arts, and of course, the supporting tools required for success. I want all of you to be dangerous old men, willing and able to stand up and aid your community in times of need. Nobody really knows what the future of warfare looks like, much less might it look like during a new civil war within the United States. Now, I suspect that it would look a lot like Ukraine, and would heavily feature drones and automated warfare and things. To be frank, I'm in no position to be teaching any of that. That's what the experts are for. But what I can do is help people like you become physically and mentally stronger so that you can adapt to new situations, to new ways of thinking, to new ways of fighting. I can provide you with the tools and advice to develop personal skills that serve you on the range and in emergencies or in your daily life. And lastly, I can be a signpost for when you might want to explore something new. In the end, I'm here because I believe in the things that I say and do, and I want you to come along with me. But do let me make one thing clear, is that if you are reading my website, you're listening to my advice, and you have the intent to do harm to others, please leave. All right. I am not here to support the idea that you can just go solve your problems with violence because you feel like it. All right. That is not the purpose of what we do here. Please move along. So with that said, this is why I haven't really been vocal about what's going on in a lot of the country, the politics and the assassination attempts. And, I could, but I feel like that's really the world for people who comment on that stuff all the time. I'm not here to agitate. I'm not here to badger you into doing something that you don't already want to do. What I want you to do, though, is stop and think about what it means to become a dangerous old man where you are capable, you're fit, you're mentally with it, and you're able to stand up and say, I'm here, I can be helpful, and then lead others to survive as well. So that's it for me today. Thanks for listening. I'm sorry it's been such a long break. Hopefully I've got a lot more coming up. Soon I'll be talking about, it's coming up on 2026, so we'll be talking about what the goals are for next year and how I might be adjusting some things around the site and what you can expect from the podcast. So tune in for next time, and until then, come by the website, everydaymarksman.co. Make sure you subscribe so you get access to the Discord server and all that fun stuff, and I hope to see you again next time. Take care.